They told me I was trespassing on my own land. That was the first sentence out of his mouth, standing there in pressed jeans and a sun hat that had never seen real sun, pointing across my pasture like he was explaining something simple to a child. And I remember thinking, either this man is confused or he thinks I am. I've lived on that stretch of ground outside Red Hollow, Wyoming for almost 30 years. 120 acres of pasture, creek-fed lowland on the west side, dry scrub rising toward the north ridge, and a long straight run of barbed wire fence that my father and I restrung back in 1994 after a bad winter took half the posts down. That land isn't just dirt to me. It's my retirement. It's the place my wife and I rebuilt our life after she got sick. It's where my daughter learned to ride. It's where I plan to grow old and not owe anyone a dime. The fence line runs east to west, clean and straight, and beyond it, there's about 50 feet of what most folks would call useless ground. Sagebrush, hardpan, a little slope. You wouldn't graze much on it. But it's in my deed. Always has been. My grandfather bought the original parcel in the 60s, and when the county digitized records, the description stayed the same. Metes and bounds don't lie, at least not usually. For 20 years, I never had reason to question it. My old neighbor, Walt Henderson, ran cattle light and never cared about that strip. We shook hands once about the line, and that was that. Walt passed, his kids sold, and that's when the Bennetts showed up. Ethan and Claire Bennett. They came in from Portland with a real estate agent and a drone camera, paid full asking price for Walt's old ranch, and told the local paper they were launching a regenerative agriculture initiative. Solar pumps, heritage chickens, farm-to-table workshops. I didn't have a problem with any of that. Hell, if they could make money off goats and yoga retreats, good for them. Land is land. Neighbors are neighbors. First time I met Ethan, I was replacing a leaning fence post near the north corner. He walked over with a coffee tumbler, smiling like we'd already agreed on something. "Morning," he said. "We're the new folks next door." I wiped my hands on my jeans and shook his hand. "Welcome to Red Hollow." We stood there by the fence. I told him straight, the boundary runs along this old wire, but the deed actually pushes about 50 feet past it into that scrub. Always been that way. He nodded slow, eyes scanning the ground like he was memorizing it. "Good to know," he said. "We appreciate clarity." That word stuck with me later. Clarity. For 5 weeks, everything was quiet. I saw them putting up a greenhouse frame, unloading cedar boards, planting something in tidy little rows that looked more decorative than edible. Claire waved when she drove by. We weren't friends, but we were civil. That's enough out here. Then one Tuesday morning I was driving my tractor along the shared line to check irrigation flow, and I damn near rolled over a bright orange stake. It wasn't alone. There were dozens of them. They ran in a perfectly straight line parallel to my fence, but about 40 feet inside my pasture. Each one had a small metal tag screwed to it. Property line. Do not cross. I shut off the tractor and just sat there a minute, engine ticking as it cooled, wind moving through the dry grass. I walked from stake to stake, counting under my breath. They had cut a clean line across my ground like they were carving a roast. I called Ethan right there. "What are these stakes doing on my land?" I asked. He didn't pause, didn't even pretend to check. "That's not your land, Caleb," he said. Calm, casual. "We had a survey done. The actual boundary is where those markers are." I looked out over the pasture I'd mowed, fertilized, paid taxes on for decades. "My deed says different." "Your deed is outdated," he replied. "Survey technology's improved a lot since the 60s. Our guy is certified. You might want to review your paperwork." There was something in his tone, not angry, not aggressive. Certain, like he had already moved on from the argument and was waiting for me to catch up. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. That evening I pulled my deed from the file cabinet in my office. The description was clear as daylight. Bearings. Distances. Iron pin at the northeast corner. Extend west 2,640 feet. No ambiguity. Still, I couldn't sleep that night. Because here's the thing people don't tell you about land disputes. It's not just about acreage. It's about doubt. If someone can stand on your ground and say it isn't yours with a straight face, it plants something in you. Makes you question what you thought was solid. By morning, I called my attorney. Her name's Margaret Shaw, 62 years old, third-generation Wyoming lawyer, and tougher than frozen fence wire. She's handled grazing rights cases that lasted longer than some marriages. I drove into town and spread my deed across her conference table, She read it twice, then leaned back. Did they give you a copy of their survey? She asked. Not yet. She tapped the paper. If this description is correct, and it matches county record, then that strip is yours. But don't argue from memory. Argue from measurement. Get your own licensed surveyor. I hired Rick Dalton, been measuring Wyoming dirt since disco was on the radio. He came out with GPS equipment that looked like it belonged on a NASA rover. Spent 2 full days walking the corners, digging for old markers, cross-checking with county plats. When he finished, he knocked on my door and laid the map out on my kitchen table. He scratched his chin and said, "Well, you're not going to hate this." My stomach tightened. "Just tell me." "The old fence is off," he said. I felt heat rise in my chest. "Off how?" "In your favor." He pointed to the line. "Your true boundary isn't 50 feet past that fence. It's closer to 55. And those orange stakes your neighbor put in? They're sitting on your land, and still 5 feet short of where the line actually runs." I stared at the map. So not only had Ethan pushed 40 feet into my pasture, he hadn't even been bold enough to go all the way to the real line. That's when it shifted for me. This wasn't confusion. This was calculation. And that's where things stopped being about a fence and started being about who thought they could take what. I wish I could tell you I walked over there calm and reasonable, map in hand, ready for a civilized conversation, but that's not how it felt inside my chest. It felt like someone had leaned over my table and helped themselves to food off my plate, smiling while they did it. Still, I tried. I drove over that afternoon with Rick's survey rolled up under my arm. Ethan was out near his greenhouse, adjusting some drip lines, Claire kneeling beside him planting something delicate and expensive looking. He saw me coming and stood up before I said a word. "Caleb," he said, polite as ever. "What's up?" I unrolled the survey across the hood of his truck. The Wyoming wind tried to take it twice before he put his hand on one corner. "I had my own survey done," I said. "Licensed. County records verified. Your stakes are on my land. And not just a little." He didn't look surprised. He studied the map like he was reviewing a menu. "Our survey says otherwise," he replied. "We used a Denver firm. Top tier. They specialize in rural boundary corrections." Boundary corrections. I let that hang in the air. Corrections imply something was wrong. "Well," he said lightly, "older properties often have discrepancies, especially when fences don't match deeds." I felt my jaw tighten. The fence never defined the boundary. The deed did. Always has. Claire finally spoke, brushing dirt off her hands. "We invested everything into this place. We can't build infrastructure if we don't know where our land ends. And you figured it ended 40 feet into mine?" Ethan's smile faded just a touch. "We figured it ends where our survey shows." There it was again. Certainty. Not confusion. Not negotiation. Just quiet insistence. I left without raising my voice, but I called Margaret before I hit the highway. She sent a formal demand letter the next morning. Attached Rick's survey. Gave them 15 days to remove the stakes and acknowledge the correct boundary. Professional. Direct. No drama. Their response came from a law firm in Denver with letterhead so heavy it felt like it weighed more than my truck title. They claimed their survey was certified, ours was biased, and proposed a third joint survey at shared expense. Margaret read it and snorted. When 2 surveys and the deed agree, you don't split the difference. You file a quiet title action and let a judge end it. So that's what we did. Now here's where things started to turn from frustrating to personal. While the case moved through court, Ethan didn't wait. First, he replaced his orange stakes with taller treated posts. Then he strung temporary wire between them. Then irrigation lines appeared. PVC piping, neat trenches cut right through the strip in dispute. I walked over one evening and found him setting posts for a small equipment shed. "You've been served," I reminded him. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Possession matters, Caleb. Courts look at usage. That's not how this works." He shrugged. "We'll see." That shrug, that casual confidence, it got under my skin more than yelling would have. At night, I lay awake running numbers in my head. Legal fees. Survey costs. The time this was taking. I'd built my retirement plan on steady, predictable land value. Water rights. Grazing leases. Not courtroom drama. My daughter called one Sunday and asked why I sounded tired. I almost told her. Almost said I was afraid of losing ground my father had walked. But pride's a funny thing. I just said, "Neighbor dispute. It'll pass." It didn't pass. It escalated. Ethan started hosting weekend farm tours. Groups of visitors walking near that disputed strip while he talked about land stewardship and responsible boundaries. I stood on my porch once and watched him gesture toward that very stretch of grass like it was part of his vision. It wasn't about the 50 feet anymore. It was about narrative. He was building a story where he was the forward-thinking restorer, and I was the stubborn relic clinging to outdated lines. Margaret prepared meticulously. She pulled archived county plats, tax payment history, original filing scans from the 60s. Rick compiled GPS data with margin of error calculations so tight you'd need a microscope to argue them. 4 months after filing, we stood in Judge Eleanor Whitaker's courtroom. She grew up on a cattle ranch outside Casper. Rumor had it she could read a land map faster than most people read a menu. Gray hair pulled back, glasses low on her nose, expression that didn't waste energy. Ethan sat at the defense table in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first pickup. Claire beside him, hands folded tight. Their attorney spoke smoothly about evolving survey standards, historical inconsistencies, equitable use. Margaret didn't match his polish. She didn't need to. She walked the judge through the deed line by line, then laid Rick's findings beside it like 2 puzzle pieces clicking together. Judge Whitaker asked 3 questions. Just 3. Does the plaintiff's survey align with the recorded deed? Yes, Your Honor. Does the defendant's survey deviate from that deed? A pause from their attorney. It interprets. Deviate, she repeated. Yes. She leaned back, folded her hands, and said, the boundary is as described in the recorded deed and confirmed by the plaintiff's licensed survey. The defendant's markers and improvements lie within the plaintiff's property. Defendant has 21 days to remove all structures, posts, and installations from the disputed area. No theatrics. No gavel slam. Just finality. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Outside the courthouse, Ethan caught up to me. This isn't over, he said quietly. It is, I replied. You've got 21 days. He held my gaze longer than comfortable. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That line stuck with me all the way home. Harder than it needs to be. Like defending what's yours is an inconvenience. Day 1 passed. Day 5. Day 12. Nothing moved. The shed frame stood there like a dare. Irrigation lines still buried. Posts unmoved. Margaret sent a reminder notice on day 18. No response. On day 21, I drove the boundary at sunset. The wind moved through the grass the same way it always had. The posts cast long shadows across my ground. I realized something standing there. This wasn't just about acreage to Ethan. It was about control. If he conceded, his vision had limits. If he pushed and I folded, he'd expanded his world. And I think he believed I would eventually fold. He didn't understand something simple about rural people. We can compromise on a lot. We can share water in a drought. We can mend fence for each other after a storm. But when it comes to clear lines, we hold them. Day 22 came cold and bright. And that's when the real confrontation happened. Day 22 broke, clear and sharp. The kind of Wyoming morning where the sky looks scrubbed clean and every sound carries a little farther than usual. I was up before sunrise, coffee in hand, standing on my porch looking toward that strip of land like it might have changed its mind overnight. It hadn't. The shed frame was still there, posts still marching across my pasture like they belonged. Margaret had already lined things up, court order in hand. Sheriff's office notified. Rick agreed to come out and set permanent markers along the true boundary, bright caps stamped with his license number so there'd be no confusion this time. I hired a local crew, 3 guys I've known for years, the kind who don't ask a lot of questions when the paperwork is solid. When we rolled up just after 8, frost was still clinging to the grass. Rick started at the northeast corner, tripod planted firm, GPS unit humming quietly. He worked methodically, calling out measurements, driving steel pins into the earth with a rhythm that felt final. Each metallic strike echoed more than it should have. I stood there holding the folded court order, watching the line become visible in a way it hadn't been before. Not imaginary, not debated, measured, fixed. Then we began removing what didn't belong. The crew cut the temporary wire first. Snip, snap, down it came. They pulled posts with a hydraulic jack, one after another, stacking them neatly by the access road. The irrigation line took longer. Trenches reopened, PVC lifted, dirt filled back and smooth. The shed frame was last. It had barely begun, just studs and base plates anchored shallow, but it had stood there like a statement. We disassembled it piece by piece. About halfway through, I saw a dust cloud coming fast down the county road. Ethan's truck. He pulled up hard, doors swinging open before the engine stopped. Claire was in the passenger seat, face pale, eyes wide. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ethan shouted, striding toward us. I handed him the court order before he reached the crew. Enforcing it. His face flushed deep red. "You can't just destroy our property. You had 21 days. We filed an emergency motion. It was denied yesterday afternoon." That stopped him for a fraction of a second. He looked at Claire, then back at me. "You're enjoying this." I wasn't. Not the way he meant. There was no joy in it. Just a heavy sense of inevitability. "You built on land a judge confirmed isn't yours," I said evenly. "This is cleanup." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You could have given us more time." "You had time." The sheriff's truck pulled up then, slow and deliberate, parking along the road. Deputy Morales stepped out, hands resting near his belt, but posture relaxed. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. His presence drew a clean line between argument and action. Claire finally spoke, her voice tight. "We put so much into this project. Investors are watching. This makes us look reckless." I almost felt something at that. Almost. Because I understood reputation. In a small community, how you're seen matters. But reputation built on land that isn't yours is a shaky foundation. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting from the dismantled shed to the survey markers Rick had just capped bright orange and white. "Official. Permanent." "This isn't over," he said again, but there was less certainty in it now. "It is," I replied. We loaded the last of the materials onto a flatbed. I told the crew to stack everything neatly just inside Ethan's actual boundary. Nothing damaged. Nothing destroyed. Just removed. Before leaving, Rick walked the entire line once more, checking coordinates, tapping each marker like he was sealing something in place. When it was done, the pasture looked the way it had before all this started. Open. Uncomplicated. Quiet. Ethan stood there a long time, staring at the restored stretch like it offended him. Finally he said, almost to himself, "You could have partnered with us. We had plans that would have increased everyone's property value." And there it was. The motive under all of it. Expansion dressed up as vision. "I'm not against growth," I told him. "I'm against rewriting lines without consent." He didn't answer. He just walked back to his truck. Claire lingered a second longer, eyes soft, like she wanted to say something conciliatory, but she didn't. They drove off without another word. 2 days later, Margaret called. Judge Whitaker had issued the final order on fees. Ethan and Claire were responsible for all my legal expenses, Rick's survey costs, and $4,200 for labor. The judge added a warning. Any further construction beyond their confirmed boundary would result in contempt of court. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt complicated. For weeks afterward, the space between our properties carried a kind of tension you could almost see in the air. No more friendly waves. No more polite nods. Just distance. They adjusted their plans, shifted their greenhouse expansion eastward. Their tours continued, though I noticed they stopped gesturing toward my pasture when they talked about future growth. One evening, about a month after everything settled, I found Ethan at the fence line, not crossing it, just standing there. He didn't look at me when I walked up. "You ever think," he said, "that boundaries are sometimes just old decisions we're afraid to question?" I leaned against the post. "Sure, but if you question them, you better be ready for the answer." He gave a half laugh. Not bitter, not friendly, just tired. "I thought we were correcting history." "History doesn't always need correcting," I said. "Sometimes it just needs respecting." We stood there in silence a minute. Wind moving through the grass again, same as always. Here's the part one didn't expect. A few weeks later, he sent over a proposal, not to reclaim land, but to collaborate on water conservation along the creek that actually does cross both our properties. Shared cost, shared benefit, clear agreements in writing. I haven't decided yet whether I'll say yes, because this whole thing changed something in me. I realized how fast certainty can turn into entitlement, how vision can slide into overreach, and how easily a neighbor can become an adversary when lines blur. I also learned something about myself. I always believed I was easygoing, flexible, willing to adapt, and maybe I am, until something fundamental gets challenged. Then I become immovable. Some folks in town think I was too rigid, that I could have negotiated, sold the strip at a premium, turned conflict into profit. Others say I did exactly what needed to be done, that if I'd given an inch it would have set a precedent no one out here could afford. So I'll ask you this. If someone with big plans and big money told you your deed was wrong, would you fight it to the end, or would you compromise for the sake of peace? Was I defending what's right, or just clinging to tradition? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you've ever been in a boundary dispute, land, business, even family, I want to hear how you handled it. Because out here, lines matter. And sometimes the hardest part isn't drawing them. It's holding them.